Hello everybody, my name is Josue Obregon and I work in the Industrial Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Kyung Hee University. Today, I will present Chapter 7.1 from Interpretable Machine Learning book by Christoph Molnar. This chapter introduces methods for learning features from neural networks. So far, we studied intrinsic interpretation models, model-agnostic methods, and example-based explanations. However, this chapter is focused on neural networks interpretation. Let us start understanding that to make predictions with a neural network, the data input pass through layers of multiplication with the learned weights and through nonlinear transformations. Then, interpreting very small networks will be straightforward. But what happened with the current state-of-the-art networks? For example, GoogleNet, which has 22 layers and more than 6 million parameters. A single prediction can involve millions of mathematical operations and is impossible for humans to understand what is happening with the input values and the final predictions. So why don't we use model-agnostic methods such as local models or partial dependence plots? Well, there are mainly two reasons to consider specific methods for neural networks. First, neural networks learn features and concepts in their hidden layers, as is described in the deep learning book. Deep learning introduces representations of the data that are expressed in terms of other simple representations. Therefore, we need special tools to uncover them. And second, the gradient can be used to implement interpretation methods that are more computationally efficient than model-agnostic methods that look at the model from the outside. Additionally, most of the studied methods are used to interpret models for tabular data. Image and text data require different methods. The methods and examples shown in this chapter use image data and convolutional neural networks. Feature visualization visualizes the learned features by activation maximization, and network dissection labels neural network units with human concepts. For introducing the concept of learned features, we see again GoogleNet, which is an inception type convolutional neural network developed by Google, who won the ImageNet large-scale visual recognition competition in 2014. The network transforms the image many times. First, the image goes through many convolutional layers. In those convolutional layers, the network learns new and increasingly complex features in its layers. Then, the transformed image information goes through the fully connected layers and turns into a classification or prediction. The first convolutional layers learn features such as edges and simple textures. Here we see layer 3A as an example, which learn some interesting textures. Later convolutional layers learn features such as more complex textures and patterns, as it can be seen in layer 4A with more complex patterns, even including some dog eyes and something that seems to be birds. The last convolutional layers learn features such as objects or parts of objects. Layer 4D learns more sophisticated concepts like a particular kind of animal snout or snake heads. Layer 5A visualizations become harder, but the concepts are still specific like balls or brass instruments. The fully connected layers learn to connect the activations from the high-level features to the individual classes to be predicted. Looks cool, right? But how does this image are obtained? The approach of making the learned features explicit is called feature visualization. Feature visualization for a unit of a neural network is done by finding the input that maximizes the activation of that unit. But what does a unit refer to on a neural network? For convolutional networks, it can refer either to individual convolutional neurons, convolution channels, also called future maps, or entire layers. For feed-forward networks, it's quite similar: single neurons or hidden layers, or the final class probability in classification, or the corresponding pre-softmax neuron. Individual neurons are atomic units of the network, so we will get the most information by creating future visualizations for each neuron. But as you can guess, the problem lies in that neural networks often contain millions of neurons. Looking at each neuron's future visualization will take too long. Using channels, which are also called activation maps, as units are a good choice for future visualization. We can go one step further and visualize an entire convolutional layer. Layers as a unit are used for Google's Deep Dream, which repeatedly adds the visualized features of a layer to the original image, resulting in a dreamlike version of the input. I tried the website and generated this dreamlike image of this Chinese garden. It's quite interesting. In mathematical terms, feature visualization is an optimization problem. We assume that the weights of the neural network are fixed, which means that the network is trained, and we are looking for a new image that maximizes the mean activation of a unit. In this maximization equation, the function h is the activation of a neuron, img the image input of the network, x and y describe the spatial position of the neuron, n specifies the layer, and z is the channel index. If we want to understand individual features, we can search for examples where they have high values, either for a neuron at an individual position or for an entire channel. This is done using these two equations. If we want to understand a layer as a whole, we can use the Deep Dream objective, searching for images the layer finds interesting. And if we want to create examples of output classes from a classifier, we have two options: optimizing class logits before the softmax or optimizing class probabilities after the softmax. In this optimization formula, all neurons in channel G are equally weighted. Alternatively, we can also maximize random directions, which means that the neurons will be multiplied by different parameters, including negative directions. In this way, we study how the neurons interact with the channel. Instead of maximizing the activation, you can also minimize the activation, which corresponds to maximizing the negative direction. It is very interesting to note that when we maximize the negative direction, we get very different features for the same unit. For example, the unit 0 of layer 4D of GoogleNet have two different visualizations of the channels for the positive and negative directions. The positive channel produces this visualization, and it is greatly activated with these data set examples. It seems that it recognizes flowers and bird feathers. On the other hand, the negative channel recognizes dog faces. So, how to address this optimization problem and find images? First, why should we generate new images? We could simply search through the training images and select those that maximize the activation of the unit. This is a valid approach, but using training data has the problem that elements on the images can be correlated and we can't see what the neural network is really looking for. For example, if images that yield a high activation of a certain channel show a dog and a tennis ball, we don't know whether that neural network looks at the dog, the tennis ball, or maybe at both. The other approach is to generate new images, starting from random noise, to obtain meaningful visualizations. There are usually constraints on the image, for example, that only small changes are allowed. There is a connection between feature visualization and adversarial examples. Both techniques maximize the activation of a neural network unit. However, for adversarial examples, we look for the maximum activation of the neuron for the adversarial class. Another difference is the input image for the method. For adversarial examples, it is the image for which we want to generate the adversarial image. For future visualization, it depends on the approach, for example, random noise. This method can also be used for tabular and text data. For tabular data, the learned features will be a certain combination of the original features, for example. Additionally, the method has been applied to recurrent neural networks, discovering interesting interpretable features such as the open and closing parenthesis character and end of the line and URL. Some of the images presented before seem to show well-known concepts like dogs' snouts or balls, but how can we be sure? The network dissection method links human concepts with individual neural network units, but it requires extra datasets that someone has labeled with human concepts. The network dissection approach quantifies the interpretability of a unit of a convolutional neural network. Basically, it links highly activated areas inside the network with human concepts such as textures, colors, parts, or objects. In the previous section, we saw how the channels of neural networks learn new features. but these visualizations do not prove that a unit has learned a certain concept. Additionally, there is no measure for how well a unit detects objects. The network dissection method relies on a big hypothesis, which is units of a neural network, such as convolutional channels, learn disentangled concepts. Disentangled features mean that individual network units detect specific real-world concepts. For example, convolutional layer 3B might detect dog 4, layer 4C dog eyes, and layer 5A dog snouts. The opposite of a disentangled network is a completely entangled network in which, for example, there will be no individual unit for dog snouts. All units will contribute to the recognition of a dog. Disentangled features imply that the network is highly interpretable. Let us assume we have a network with completely disentangled units that are labeled with known concepts. This will allow the possibility to track the network's decision-making process. For example, we could analyze how the network classifies wolves against huskies. First, we identify the husky unit. We can check whether this unit depends on the dog snout, fluffy fur, and snow units from the previous layer. If it does, we know that it will misclassify an image of a husky with a snowy background as a wolf. In a disentangled network, we could identify problematic non-causal correlations and automatically list all highly activated units and their concepts to explain an individual prediction. The network dissection algorithm has 3 steps. First, we need a human-labeled dataset of visual concepts. The concepts go from objects, such as water or dogs, scenes, such as streets or skyscrapers, to textures, such as line or cracked. The second step is measuring the convolutional neural network channel activations for these images, and the final step quantifies the alignment between activations and label concepts. In the figure, we can see how an image is forwarded to a channel and matched with the label concept. In this example figure, we also show the 256 units of AlexNet Com5 trained on the places dataset. It represents many objects and texture, as well as some scenes, parts, materials, and a color. The first step is data collection. Network dissection requires pixel-wise level images with concept of different abstraction levels, from colors to street scenes. Pao and Su et al. Combine a couple of datasets with pixel-wise concepts. They call this new dataset Broaden, which stands for Broadly and Densely Labeled Data. Broaden contains 60,000 images with over 1,000 visual concepts in different abstraction levels, from scenes, objects to materials and colors. The following figure shows sample images from the Broaden dataset, in which we can see the group of pixels labeled with visual concept. The second step is the creation of masks of the top activated areas per channel and per image. The algorithm is presented here. The main steps are the extraction of pixel activations of the convolutional channel K and the calculation of the pixel activation distributions over all images. After that, using a quantile threshold, the top 0.5% of all activations of channel K for image X are obtained. Finally, for each image in the Broaden dataset, a binarized mask of activations is created using the quantile threshold. You can pause the video and check all the steps more carefully. The last step is to find the human concept that activates each channel. The activation masks mark highly activated areas, and for each channel, we want to find the human concept that activates that channel. We find the concept by comparing the activation masks with all labeled concepts. We quantify the alignment between activation mask K and concept mask C with the intersection over union score, which is also known as Jacquard similarity, and it is a measure of the overlap between two regions. Intersection over union compares the alignment between two areas and can be interpreted as the accuracy with which unit K detects concept C. We call unit K a detector of concept C when IOU sub KC is greater than 0.04. This threshold was chosen by the authors of the method. Here I show some examples taken from the project website. I chose two examples with high IOU values. The first concept is trains and the second concept is dogs. It is interesting that some images were activated with the dog concept but are actually a sheep and an owl. The network dissection authors trained different network architectures such as AlexNet, VGG, GoogleNet, and ResNet from scratch on different datasets, such as ImageNet, Places 205, and Places 365. The main conclusions are that the networks detect lower-level concepts at lower layers and high-level concepts at higher layers, as it can be seen in the video. It starts with colors and moves until it detects a car. Another conclusion is that increasing the number of channels in a layer increases the number of interpretable units. The ResNet trained on the Places 365 learned the most unique concepts from all. An interesting finding is that in transfer learning, the concept of a channel can change. For example, in the video we can see that a dog detector becomes a waterfall detector. Finally, the authors experimented rotating the channels and found that channels got entangled. Rotate means to generate new channels as linear combinations of the original channels while classification performance is maintained. They conclude that rotation reduces interpretability because the number of unique detectors is reduces as the channels are rotated. This also means that interpretability of convolutional neural networks is axis dependent and that interpretability is independent of discriminative power. Now let us briefly review the advantages and disadvantages of these methods. Future visualizations give unique insight into the working of neural networks, especially for image recognition. Through the present methods, we have been able to understand better the internals of neural networks. For example, that the models learn first simple edge and texture detectors, and in higher layers the models learn more abstract part and complete object detectors. Additionally, the network dissection method helps to quantify the interpretability of neural network units, and it also helps to automatically link units to concepts. Both methods are great tools to communicate in a non-technical way how neural networks work. The methods also help to detect other concepts beyond the classes in the classification tasks. And the last advantage is that it can be combined with future attribution methods to explain individual classifications along with visualizations of the learned features. The disadvantages are that many future visualizations are not interpretable. Besides, there are too many units to look at. So interpreting big networks requires a lot of time. And we have to be careful to not fall in the illusion of interpretability of convolutional neural networks. Just because we identify that a specific neuron on a specific layer was activated with dog's eyes does not mean that we fully understand how the model works. There is still a lot of work to do on this research area. Finally, you need datasets that are labeled on the pixel level, which is also time-consuming. To finish this presentation, I just mentioned some interesting software and further material about the presented methods. There is an open source implementation of future visualization called Lucid. You can conveniently try it in your browser by using the notebook links that are provided on the Lucid GitHub page. No additional software is required. Other implementations are TF CNN Vs for TensorFlow, Keras filters for Keras, and Deep Vs for Caffe. Network Dissection has a great project website which is worth to check it out. The website hosts additional materials such as code, data, and visualizations of activation masks. Thank you very much for your attention.